29th, 1854. King William Island, Canadian Arctic. Dr. John Ray stands motionless in the snow, staring at what the Inuit hunter has just placed in his trembling hands. A silver spoon, ornate, English. The family crest is still visible beneath 6 years of tarnish. But it's what the hunter tells him next that makes his blood run cold. The white men, the hunter says through broken English, they were eating each other when they died. And after, the dogs finished what was left. Ray looks down at the spoon again, then at the pile of other artifacts the Inuit have brought. Watches, buttons, fragments of naval uniforms, and bones, so many bones. Some with marks that couldn't possibly have come from anything but human teeth. 129 men from Sir John Franklin's expedition vanished into the Arctic in 1845. The Royal Navy called it a tragic accident, a disappearance, a mystery of the ice. But the truth was far more terrifying. Before we uncover the truth about what really happened to Franklin's crew and their sled dogs in the frozen hell of the Canadian Arctic, make sure to subscribe to FrozEN and ring that notification bell. We're exploring one of history's most disturbing maritime disasters, a story the British Empire tried desperately to bury. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and whether you've ever heard the real story of the Franklin expedition. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers, especially on cases this dark. Now let's descend into the ice. London, England, May 19, 1845. The Thames River swarms with spectators. Thousands line the embankments, waving handkerchiefs and British flags as two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, prepare to depart on what newspapers are calling the most well-equipped polar expedition in human history. This is the height of the British Empire. Queen Victoria has been on the throne for 8 years. Britain rules a quarter of the world's population, and now, they're determined to conquer the last great geographical mystery, the Northwest Passage, a navigable route through the Arctic connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Leading this expedition is Sir John Franklin, a 59-year-old naval veteran with a reputation for survival. He's already mapped thousands of miles of Arctic coastline. He's a hero, a knight, the perfect symbol of British superiority over nature itself. The ships are floating fortresses, reinforced hulls, steam engines, central heating, libraries stocked with 1,200 books, fine china and crystal for officers' dinners, 3 years' worth of canned provisions from the Goldner Company, the most advanced preserved food technology in the world. And then there are the dogs, 60 Greenland Huskies, purchased from Danish traders, massive animals, bred for centuries to pull sleds across impossible terrain. They're kept in pens on the main deck, their howls echoing across the Thames as sailors make final preparations. With these ships and these provisions, Franklin tells a reporter from the Times, "We could survive a decade in the ice if necessary. I have no concerns whatsoever." The crowd erupts in cheers. No one notices the dogs have stopped howling. On July 26, 1845, a whaling ship encounters Erebus and Terror in Baffin Bay, waiting for ice conditions to improve before entering Lancaster Sound. The whalers report that Franklin's crew appears in excellent spirits. The officers are well fed. The dogs are healthy and active on the ice. It's the last time anyone from the expedition is seen alive. By 1847, when the ships fail to return, concern ripples through the Admiralty. By 1848, when still no word arrives, concern becomes alarm. The Royal Navy launches the first of what will become over 30 search expeditions over the next decade. But the Arctic is 40 million square kilometers of ice, water, and stone. Finding 2 ships in that vastness is like finding 2 needles in an ocean. What the searchers don't know, what no one knows yet, is that by the time they start looking, Franklin's men are already dying in ways that will haunt British society for generations. And the sled dogs, those magnificent Greenland Huskies, are learning to survive by instincts that evolution carved into their genes long before humans ever sailed north. Incident 1. The canned food. September 12, 1846. Somewhere in the ice near King William Island, able seaman Charles Best stands on the deck of HMS Terror, using a can opener to pry the lid from their dinner ration. The tin is supposed to contain preserved beef. When he finally gets it open, the smell hits him first. "Sir," he calls to Lieutenant John Irving. "This one's gone off." Irving examines the can. The solder sealing it is thick, sloppy. The manufacturing stamp shows it came from the Goldner Company's contract. 8,900 cans produced in just 8 months to meet the expedition's departure deadline. Impossible to produce with proper quality control, but the Navy had been in a hurry. Check the others, Irving orders. Best opens 6 more cans. 4 are rancid. The meat inside is gray and putrid, toxic with bacteria. Here's what makes this moment so sinister. The solder sealing these cans contains lead, massive amounts of lead, and the acid in the preserved food is slowly leaching that lead into every meal, every day, for every man on both ships. Lead poisoning causes specific symptoms: fatigue, irritability, paranoia, brain damage. But it happens slowly, invisibly. The men don't know that with every meal from these cans, they're ingesting a poison that will destroy their judgment, their coordination, their ability to make rational decisions. The dogs, fed primarily on fresh seal meat caught by Inuit guides before the ships became trapped, remain unaffected. For now. Incident 2. The ice closes in. September 1846. The ships become trapped in ice near King William Island. This isn't unusual for Arctic expeditions. The plan has always been to wait out the winter, then continue when the ice breaks up in summer. The ships are designed for this, the men are prepared. Except the ice doesn't break up in summer 1847, or summer 1848. The ships remain frozen in place, locked in a grip that tightens like a vice. The men can hear it at night, the grinding, shrieking sound of ice crushing slowly inward against the reinforced hulls. It's a sound that never stops, a constant reminder that they're trapped in a frozen desert with limited supplies and no chance of rescue. By winter 1847, the lead poisoning is accelerating. Men are experiencing mood swings. Some become violent over trivial disputes. Others withdraw into catatonic depression. Captain Francis Crozier, commanding HMS Terror after Franklin's death in June 1847, makes a decision. They'll reduce rations, stretch the supplies. Surely the ice will break next summer. The dogs receive smaller portions too. But unlike the men, the dogs have options. Sled dogs are opportunistic feeders. They've evolved alongside humans for thousands of years, but they've also retained their wolf ancestry. When food becomes scarce, they hunt. When hunting fails, they scavenge. And in the Arctic, there's always something to scavenge. Incident 3, the first disappearance. March 1848. 28 months trapped in ice. Private William Brain fails to report for morning muster on HMS Erebus. A search party finds his body 200 yards from the ship, partially buried in snow. The official cause of death: exposure. He must have left the ship disoriented and succumbed to the cold. But Surgeon Harry Goodsir notes something in his private journal, something he doesn't report to the officers. The body showed signs of disturbance by animals. Several of the sled dogs were seen in the vicinity, their muzzles stained. It's not unusual for Arctic scavengers to investigate human remains. Foxes, gulls, the dogs themselves if hungry enough. What is unusual is what Goodsir doesn't write, that Brain's body is missing significant tissue. That the damage appears systematic, not random. That one of the dogs, when brought back to the ship, had fragments of naval uniform wool in its teeth. The lead poisoning is now severe. Men are experiencing hallucinations. Some claim to see rescue ships on the horizon. Others insist they can hear their families calling from across the ice. Scurvy is setting in too, gums bleeding, teeth falling out, old wounds reopening. The canned provisions, even the ones that haven't spoiled, lack vitamin C. The men are literally decomposing from the inside while still alive, and they're starving. Incident 4, the decision to abandon ship, April 22, 1848. Captain Crozier makes the final fatal decision. A note is discovered years later, left in a cairn on King William Island. Written in the margins of an old form, the message is brief and devastating. April 25, 1848. HM ships Terror and Erebus were deserted on the 22nd April, 5 leagues NNW of this, having been beset since September 12, 1846. Sir John Franklin died on June 11, 1847, and the total loss by deaths in the expedition has been to this date 9 officers and 15 men. Start on tomorrow, 26th for Back's Fish River. 105 men prepare to walk south toward the Canadian mainland. It's over 600 miles away across some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. They load supplies onto wooden sledges, but the sledges are absurdly heavy, packed with items that make no survival sense. Silver tea sets, books, dress uniforms. The lead poisoning has destroyed their judgment completely. They bring some of the dogs, perhaps 20 or 30 animals to help pull the sledges. But there's not enough food for the dogs. There's barely enough food for the men. As the column of dying sailors begins their march south, the remaining dogs, those left behind on the ships, begin to understand something their masters cannot. The ships are tombs now, and tombs eventually give up their dead. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. The next part of this investigation reveals discoveries that shocked the Victorian world and sparked a cover-up that lasted decades. Share this with someone who loves dark historical mysteries, because what happens next changed how the world viewed polar exploration forever. Let's discover what the ice finally revealed. Spring 1854. Dr. John Ray is surveying the Boothia Peninsula for the Hudson S. Bay Company when he encounters a group of Inuit near Pelly Bay. Ray is Scottish, pragmatic, and unlike most British explorers, he actually respects indigenous knowledge. He speaks some Inuktitut. He listens when the Inuit tell him stories about the white men who died to the west. The stories are consistent across multiple witnesses. 4 winters ago, 1850, Inuit hunters encountered approximately 40 white men dragging boats south across King William Island. The men looked skeletal, they were staggering, some were pulling sledges that were clearly too heavy. The white men tried to communicate but couldn't. They offered trade goods, but had nothing the Inuit needed. The Inuit offered help, but the white men refused, paranoid and hostile. "We thought they were crazy," one hunter tells Ray. "They walked like drunk men. They pulled boats across land. In their boats were useless things, heavy things." The hunters moved on. When they returned to the area the following year, they found bodies, many bodies, scattered along the southern coast of King William Island and on the Adelaide Peninsula beyond. And this is when the hunter tells Ray something that will create an international scandal. From the mutilated state of many of the corpses and the contents of the kettles, it is evident that our wretched countrymen had been driven to the last resource, cannibalism, as a means of prolonging existence. Ray purchases several artifacts from the Inuit. The silver spoon, watches engraved with officers' names, fragments of uniforms. He examines the relics carefully, documenting each one. Then he writes his report to the Admiralty and includes the Inuit testimony about cannibalism. The report arrives in London on October 23, 1854. The British Empire loses its mind. Charles Dickens, yes, that Charles Dickens, publishes articles in his magazine Household Words viciously attacking Ray's report. The Inuit are lying savages, Dickens claims. British naval officers would never resort to cannibalism. It's impossible, unthinkable. A slander against heroes. Lady Jane Franklin, Sir John's widow, leads a campaign to discredit Ray. She raises money for more search expeditions, determined to prove her husband's men died with honor. But Ray's report is correct. Over the next 150 years, multiple expeditions will find human remains scattered across King William Island. Bones showing cut marks from knives. Skulls cracked open to access brain matter. Long bones split lengthwise to extract marrow. Modern forensic analysis will confirm it. The Franklin expedition survivors resorted to cannibalism in their final weeks. But there's something else the bones reveal, something the Victorian era never discovered because the forensic technology didn't exist yet. Many of the bones show damage from a second source. Canine teeth marks. Deep gouges consistent with large carnivores feeding on human remains. The tooth spacing and bite pressure match perfectly with large northern dog breeds. Greenland Huskies. The dogs didn't just scavenge the dead. In several cases, based on the pattern of injuries, forensic anthropologists believe the dogs attacked men who were still alive but too weak to defend themselves. The sled dogs, those magnificent animals brought to help conquer the Arctic, survived by feeding on the frozen corpses of their masters. And when corpses weren't available, they created their own. The British Admiralty's response to Ray's report reveals everything about Victorian priorities. Reputation matters more than truth. Despite Ray providing the first solid evidence of the expedition's fate, despite his meticulous documentation and reliable Inuit testimony, the Admiralty refuses to pay him the full reward offered for finding Franklin. They award him £10,000, a fortune, but only half what was promised for determining the fate of the expedition. The reason? His report mentioned cannibalism. Lady Jane Franklin becomes a celebrity crusader. She's the grieving widow defending her husband's honor against vicious rumors. She gives speeches. She meets with Queen Victoria. She funds more search expeditions, not to find truth, but to find an acceptable truth. In 1857, she sponsors Captain Francis McClintock's expedition aboard HMS Fox. MC Clintock is given specific instructions: find evidence that contradicts the cannibalism claims. What MC Clintock actually finds makes everything worse. On King William Island, his team discovers a lifeboat mounted on a sledge. The boat is 28 feet long, weighs several hundred pounds, and was clearly being dragged south by the desperate survivors. Inside the boat, 2 skeletons. Around the boat, scattered human remains from at least 5 more individuals. And the contents of the boat reveal the lead-poisoned madness that gripped the expedition. Silver plate tableware, silk handkerchiefs, boot polish, a copy of The Vicar of Wakefield, no survival supplies, no ammunition for hunting, no fishing equipment. Just the trappings of civilization, dragged uselessly across the ice by dying men who could no longer think rationally. MC Clintock also finds the cairn with Crozier's note. And more bones. So many bones. He documents everything carefully, except he makes no mention of the cut marks on the bones. No mention of evidence of cannibalism. His official report describes a tragic disaster, but maintains the fiction of British honor. However, his private notes, discovered decades later in Admiralty archives, tell a different story. Bones were in a most peculiar state. Many showed signs of having been broken open. Others bore marks consistent with knife work. I instructed the men to document the locations but collect no samples for detailed examination. Translation, he found proof of cannibalism and deliberately left it behind. The dog question is never officially addressed. McClintock's expedition finds no surviving dogs, of course. This is 9 years after the abandonment, but they find dog bones near several human remains sites. They find areas where the snow is disturbed in patterns suggesting animal dens. One passage in McClintock's private journal is particularly haunting. We discovered what appeared to be a campsite approximately 40 miles south of the ship's last position. Human bones were scattered in a circle around fire pits. Among them, the bones of at least 3 large dogs. Whether the men ate the dogs or the dogs ate the men is impossible to determine. Perhaps both occurred. The forensic evidence suggests both did occur. As men died or were killed by the cold, the surviving sailors occasionally killed dogs for food. But the dogs, now feral and starving, were simultaneously hunting the weakest humans. It's a horror of mutual predation, man eating dog, dog eating man. The Arctic doesn't care about species loyalty, it only cares about what can survive. The lead poisoning revelation. For over a century, the cannibalism remains the story's primary horror. But in 1981, anthropologist Owen Beattie begins exhuming bodies from the expedition's early graves on Beechie Island. What he finds rewrites everything. The preserved bodies, frozen solid in permafrost, show lead concentrations up to 10 times higher than normal Victorian levels, which were already elevated. The lead is concentrated in bone and hair, proving chronic exposure over months or years. Beattie's team reconstructs what happened. The poorly soldered cans leached lead into the food. Every meal was poison. The lead accumulated in their bodies, slowly destroying their nervous systems. This explains everything that previously seemed inexplicable. Why they loaded sledges with useless items, impaired judgment. Why they rejected Inuit help, paranoia. Why they couldn't navigate effectively, cognitive impairment. Why they resorted to cannibalism before fully exhausting other options, inability to think rationally. The men weren't evil, they weren't weak, they were poisoned. Their brains were literally rotting inside their skulls as they tried to survive. And the dogs, fed primarily on fresh meat, remained neurologically intact, which meant as the men became progressively more impaired and helpless, the dogs became proportionally more dangerous. The final discoveries, in 2014 and 2016, the Canadian government's Arctic research vessels locate HMS Erebus and HMS Terror using sonar. Both ships are remarkably intact, sitting upright on the seafloor. Exploration of Erebus reveals tables still set for dinner. Wine bottles in their racks. Officers' cabins with personal effects still in place. But here's what divers notice. Damage to the galley area consistent with large animals. Scratches on wooden surfaces at dog height. Gnaw marks on bones found in the food storage areas. The dogs didn't immediately leave the ships when the crew abandoned them. Some remained, surviving for weeks or months by consuming what was left in the holds, including, almost certainly, any bodies that had been stored below deck during the winter. The ships are frozen crime scenes, but the criminals and victims are all long dead. The Franklin disaster fundamentally changed polar exploration in ways that echo even today. Lesson 1. Indigenous knowledge matters. Every subsequent Arctic expedition that succeeded did so by adopting Inuit survival techniques, smaller groups, lighter sledges, dog teams, seal meat diets, snow shelters instead of tents. Roald Amundsen, who became the first to navigate the Northwest Passage in 1903 to 1906, explicitly credited Inuit methods for his success. He lived with the Netzilik Inuit for 2 winters, learning their techniques. The British tried to conquer the Arctic, Amundsen wrote. The Inuit taught me to live with it. The Franklin expedition's failure was partly technological, bad cans, lead poisoning. But it was mostly cultural arrogance. The British believed their civilization made them superior to the environment. The Inuit knew better. Lesson 2. The domestication boundary. The dog question haunts animal behaviorists to this day. Domestic dogs diverged from wolves approximately 20,000 to 40,000 years ago. They evolved to cooperate with humans, to read human facial expressions, to feel genuine attachment to their handlers. But sled dogs are different. They're closer to wolves genetically and behaviorally than most dog breeds. They're bred for work, not companionship. Their loyalty is more practical than emotional. When food disappears and humans become weak, sled dogs revert to wolf behaviors quickly. They form packs. They establish dominance hierarchies. They hunt. The Franklin expedition dogs weren't evil. They were just animals following evolutionary programming that prioritizes survival over sentiment. This raises disturbing questions. At what point does domestication fail? How much environmental pressure does it take for a man's best friend to see man as food? The answer apparently is not as much as we'd like to believe. Lesson 3. Cannibalism and civilization. The Victorian horror at Franklin expedition cannibalism reveals deep anxieties about civilization itself. The British Empire was built on the idea that British culture represented humanity's pinnacle. British men were rational, moral, superior. They didn't behave like savages. But the Arctic proved that civilization is thinner than we imagine. Remove food, add lead poisoning, introduce extreme environmental stress, and even British naval officers will eat each other. The Franklin case became Exhibit A in anthropological debates about human nature. Are we fundamentally civilized beings who occasionally lapse into savagery, or are we fundamentally savage beings who maintain civilization only under favorable conditions? The bones scattered across King William Island suggest the latter. Modern survival research confirms it. In extreme situations, the Andes plane crash of 1972, the Donner Party of 1846, numerous maritime disasters, humans routinely resort to cannibalism to survive. It's not aberrant. It's predictable. The Franklin expedition wasn't exceptional because cannibalism occurred. It was exceptional because the British Empire tried so hard to pretend it didn't. Lesson 4. What remains? Today, King William Island is still remote, still frozen most of the year. The Inuit community of Joahaven is the only permanent settlement. The scattered bones have largely been collected by researchers. The ships are protected archaeological sites. The story has been studied, analyzed, documented. But the island itself remembers. Inuit guides who take researchers to Franklin sites report feeling uneasy at certain locations. Dogs refuse to walk through specific areas. There's a sense of wrongness that lingers, whether that's psychological, projection, or something else. Who can say? But the locals know. This is where the white men died badly. This is where the rules broke down. This is where men and dogs both became something else. The Arctic doesn't care about our stories or our morality. It only cares about what can survive. And in 1848, neither Franklin's men nor their civilization could survive. Only the dogs could. And even they did so by becoming something their masters would no longer recognize as loyal companions. They became wolves again. And they feasted. What do you think pushed Captain Crozier to that final decision, abandoning the ships and marching his dying crew south into oblivion? Was it the lead poisoning destroying his judgment, desperation, or did some part of him recognize they were already dead, and movement was preferable to waiting frozen in the ice? Leave your theories in the comments below. Tell us, could you survive in the Arctic using Victorian-era equipment? Would you have trusted the Inuit testimony about cannibalism, or would you have dismissed it like Dickens did? And here's the real question this case forces us to ask. At what point does survival stop being noble and start being monstrous. When Franklin's men ate each other, were they still human? When the dogs ate their masters, were they betraying domestication or just following nature? Subscribe to Fear's Sermon for more lost chapters of history, the stories they didn't teach you in school because the truth was too dark. We're exploring the cases where human nature met its limits and broke. Ring that notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to understand that civilization is more fragile than we pretend. The Arctic is still there, still frozen, still waiting, and it's still full of bones. See you in the next video.